Here in Germany, the number of anti-Semitic incidents has risen sharply since the October the 7th Hamas terror attacks and the start of the war in Gaza. Police figures show that attacks against Jews rose by 20% last year in the capital. And in the capital, Berlin, many say they are afraid even to show in public that they are Jewish.
This chain is to remember that there are still hostages kept in the Hamas tunnels. On the upper part, it says in Hebrew, our heart is kidnapped in Gaza, and on the lower part, it says in English, bring them home now.
Michael doesn't want to be identified in this report. He is Jewish and has roots in Ukraine and Israel. He has been living in Berlin for 5 years. On subway line 8, a man recognized his necklace. He insulted him in Arabic, English and German and physically harassed him.
He shouted free Gaza, free Palestine, children murder, women murder, all the propaganda that Hamas shows the world.
Vandalism, graffiti and stars of David painted as swastikas have been appearing on walls in addition to verbal abuse, insults and violence against people perceived to be Jewish or Israeli. Jewish business owners say their premises have been targeted. Furthermore, supporters of the hostages held by Hamas say they are rarely dare to assemble publicly to show solidarity.
In any case, as a Jew, you try to be as invisible as possible so that you're not recognizable as a Jew in public.
Synagogues and other Jewish or Israeli institutions like schools, kindergartens, retirement homes and a coffee shop are under constant police protection. Nearly 200 premises are now given protection, up from 150 at the end of October 2023. The police estimate that the number of perpetrators of anti-Semitic incidents coming from the extreme left and the pro-Palestinian scene has risen significantly. Antisemitism from the far right remains a problem, police representatives told DW, but it is not growing as fast.
We no longer see the bulk of perpetrators coming from the Nazi scene. It's not right-wing extremists gaining the most momentum here. Instead, we see imported anti-Semitism, including a multitude of foreign ideologies and other religious phenomena. And this is not only on the streets, but also on social media, where this behavior is being incited.
Imported antisemitism is a controversial term in Germany because it's also used by far-right groups to stigmatize immigrants. Where do victims like Michael turn for help? Not every incident is prosecuted by the police. In Berlin, there's the OFEC Counseling Center, which means horizon in Hebrew. OFEC advisors warn that Jews are often held collectively responsible for the Israeli government's actions, giving latent antisemitism a new outlet.
It is personally very important to me that people listen and also understand that solidarity with Jewish people does not mean a lack of solidarity with Palestinians. That both can exist at the same time. And that there is absolutely no reason to kill Jews, to harm them, to attack them physically or psychologically anywhere in the world, just because there is a war in the Middle East.
For Michael, the anti-Semitic incident has had lasting consequences.
My thoughts usually are that I need to look around, see who are the people in the station, if there's a need for me to hide the necklace, be more careful, and not to have some kind of escalated situation. A little bit stressful.
Let's bring in DW's political correspondent, Simon Young. Good to see you, Simon. We just heard there in that report that there's been a significant rise in anti-Semitic attacks, 20% last year alone. What is Germany's government doing to actually address this problem?
Yes, the Interior Minister Alexander Dobrindt, when he held a press conference on this issue earlier this year, he said his response to rising anti-Semitism in Germany was twofold. on the one hand, what he called a security offensive, which essentially means beefing up the resources of the police, but on the other hand, increasing sentences for those convicted of politically motivated crimes and violence, and especially, by the way, when it comes to the police, because often the police, who, after all, stand guard outside synagogues and other Jewish sites across the country. And they also police the sometimes violent demonstrations against Israel that we've seen. So they can be on the receiving end, as it were, also of anti-Semitic violence. Now, Jewish groups also say that very often the judicial system doesn't recognise the racist and anti-Semitic motivation behind some crimes, so they call for more sensitivity on that. And in general, of course, the government does try to raise awareness of the problem of anti-Semitism generally through the education system and so on, but of course more can be done there as well.
Jewish organisations describe some of this anti-Semitism as being linked to Israel's war with Hamas. Can you tell us how criticism of the Israeli government is seen here in Germany, given the history and the special relationship between the two countries?
Yes, well, the German authorities always say that, of course, there is a right to criticise the actions of the Israeli government, but that such criticism must not cross the line into abuse of the Jewish people, or indeed denial of the right of Israel to exist. And those things are, of course, especially important given the historical context of the Holocaust perpetrated by Germans against the Jews. And I think there is some reality behind that, the fact that it's possible to criticise the Israeli government. For instance, was made clear just earlier this summer when Friedrich Merz announced that the government would no longer supply weapons to Israel that could be used in Gaza. And he said at the time, the harsh military action by Israel's army makes it difficult to see how the objectives of bringing home the hostages and achieving a ceasefire can be achieved. So that was pretty clear criticism. The problem is that all too often this protest on the streets confuses all kind of Jewish symbols with the Israeli government. For instance, a recent case in Berlin, a man ripped down an Israeli flag that was actually at a memorial highlighting the plight of the hostages being held by Hamas, and that man is now being prosecuted. So you see how this line all too often gets blurred.
And Simon, we heard in the report police describing imported anti-Semitism. Can you give us some context around the use of that phrase here in Germany?
Well, the first thing to say is, of course, anti-Semitism is also a homegrown phenomenon with a long tradition, which, of course, led to the Holocaust. But when in 2015, 2016, around 1 million refugees arrived in Germany from Syria, Iraq and Afghanistan, that led some people, especially those on the right, to say that those people brought with them sort of a general anti-Semitism, and they began to talk about imported anti-Semitism, and it was picked up by the far right in particular. Since then, it's become more mainstream. Chancellor Merz, Interior Minister Dobrindt have also used this term. In fact, Dobrindt went even further. He said people who come here and bring their anti-Semitism with them are not welcome, should be sent home. So there is a sort of rhetorical battle around this. I think one problem with the term is it obscures the fact that there's also plenty of homegrown anti-Semitism. As the government also says, the majority of anti-Semitic incidents and attacks are still caused by people on the far right here in Germany. That's a more serious problem.
DW Simon Young. Simon, thank you so much for that. Dalia Grinfeld is Deputy Director for European Affairs at the Anti-Defamation League. That's an international organisation dedicated to fighting anti-Semitism and all forms of hate. Great to have you on the show, Dalia. Can I ask you, how do you feel when you hear that the Jewish man in our report there didn't want to show his face, when a community leader says, as a Jew, you try to be as invisible as possible?
It is sadly not an uncommon situation. It is sadly not something that only one or two Jews go through. I just was at a conference with hundreds of European Jewish students, and many of them told us that they want to and need to hide their Star of David or their speaking Hebrew. So it's a common denominator. It's a common problem for Jews to think about having to hide their identity, especially for women more than for men, and for being alone at night, for example. So this is a very common phenomenon that we see.
And to what extent would you say this recent rise in anti-Semitism is connected to Israel's war against Hamas in Gaza?
So the increased anti-Semitic atmosphere is in parts driven by the aftermath of October 7th, the terrorist massacre in Israel. Our ADL Global 100 survey from 2024 showed that the global rise of anti-Semitic attitudes, which showed that 46% of adults worldwide hold significant anti-Semitic beliefs, showed that. So in parts, it is because of the aftermath of October 7th, large mass demonstrations, and different anti-Semitic incidents from different perspectives and sides. But anti-Semitism has been there before October 7th. Just since October 7th, there has been an epidemic of anti-Semitism. Authorities have not taken a strong hand against anti-Semitism. Bad actors used that lack of authority, for example, in universities, to strike and amp up the volume of anti-Semitism. So use places where one didn't have maybe so many regulations against anti-Semitism and how to deal with anti-Semitism to amp up the volume to an extreme. So, for example, the universities are an epicenter of anti-Semitism since October 7th.
And when is criticism of the Israeli government's actions, when is that legitimate protest? And when does it cross the line into anti-Semitism?
I think there are no better and stronger critics of Israel than the Jews themselves, first of all. But it's very clear you can criticize actions of the Israeli government, as you can do with every other government in the world, in a specific manner. You can criticize actions. You can criticize a law, a policy, a strategy. You can do that. But when you demonize the country, when you go against the right of existence of Israel, when you have double standards against Israel and just have this one specific argument against Israel, then it goes into anti-Zionism, which is anti-Semitism. And there's a double standard that people apply towards Israel that they don't apply to other countries such as Russia or China or Qatar.
We saw in our report a police union spokesperson using the term imported anti-Semitism. He was referring to migrants arriving with anti-Semitic views. Do you think that this is a real issue in Germany today?
So anti-Semitism has been part of Germany since before there was mass immigration. The Holocaust originated in Germany. It's a German thought, right? It was based out of Germany, and even after the war and before we had mass immigration, there was anti-Semitism in Germany, and as it was in Europe. However, since October 7th, the face of anti-Semitism, the way anti-Semitism presents itself and shows up in Jews' everyday lives, is different. So nowadays we see it much more from pro-Palestinian actors, from progressive spaces, LGBTQ spaces, where anti-Semitism is not just there, but it's tolerated. And that's one of the big differences since October 7th. There's more spaces and more actors who are being tolerated, who actively are anti-Semitic, have anti-Semitic rhetoric. And it's something that already started with COVID and the COVID-related anti-Semitism, but especially in the last year since October 7th and the aftermath and connection towards Israel and double standards towards Israel is something that we see in Germany, but also Europe and across the globe.
Dalia Grinfeld with the Anti-Defamation League. Dalia, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much.